Good to see you all here. Really full room for my favourite subject. So those who don't know me, I'm Chris Ensor. I'm one of the Deputy Directors, National Cybersecurity Centre, and I've been involved in Cyber Essentials for the last 10 years. And today, I know Cyber Essentials for many people is a little bit like Marmite. But by the end of the session, you will all love Marmite, I can guarantee it. Well, that's our objective. And we'll see how far we get. So, a little bit of context. So, on the back of the Co-op, Marks and Spencer's, Jaguar Land Rover, all those events, we saw it's sort of an unprecedented. We had 4 ministers, including the Chancellor, together with the Chief Executive of National Cybersecurity Centre, Richard, and the Chief Executive of NCA, write to the FTSE 350 companies saying 3 things to them. The first was governance. The second thing was to register with early warning. And anybody in this room hasn't registered with early warning, please do. It's one of our active cyber defence services. And the third thing was to push Cyber Essentials down into the supply chain. So those were the 3 things. And today we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into that. What it means, what are some of the challenges, what are some of the benefits, what experiences have people had. So that's going to be today. And as I say, the outcome of today will be you're all coming from this room loving Marmite. So that is my objective for today. We've got using Slido. So if you've got any questions, please put them into Slido, and I'll pick them up as we go. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves and say a little bit about their involvement in Cyber Essentials. So I'll start with that end. Steph, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Perry, and I am the Global CISO for Babcock International, the engineering and defence company. Insofar as Cyber Essentials goes, it is the primary mechanism that we use across our supply chain to be able to assure a baseline of cybersecurity compliance across our environment.
Neil?
Morning, everyone. Neil Binnie, Group CISO for Morgan Sindall. We work across the built environment, and Cyber Essentials is the baseline that most of our clients expect us to deliver for most of our commercial projects and public sector, and they were therefore pushing it down into our supply chain to extend that behaviour.
Hi everyone, I'm Irfan Hemani. I'm the Deputy Director for UK Cybersecurity and Resilience Policy, and for me, Cyber Essential is critical because it's what we expect as a baseline the entire economy to adhere to for minimum levels of cybersecurity, and my job is to get that message out a bit more broadly than we have done so far.
Hi, I'm Emma Philpott. I'm the CEO of IASME. We're the delivery partner for Cyber Essentials. And we've really found over the last, however long, 10 years, the main reason that organizations do Cyber Essentials is because their customer tells them they have to. And so overwhelmingly, I think the way to get Cyber Essentials and basic cyber hygiene in the economy is for customers to ask their suppliers to get it.
Cool, thank you. So I'll come to Stephanie first with the first question. How can large organizations use Cyber Essentials as a scalable, proportionate expectations without overburdening suppliers?
It's an excellent question, and one that our procurement and supply chain function deal with every day. So we have a massive supply chain, so like over 7,500 suppliers across our supply chain. So being able to understand risk within that supply chain is really important to us. We have to have a mechanism for being able to put in place a baseline governance framework, an ability to be able to understand the risk in that supply chain, a forum for being able to engage with that supply chain in a meaningful way, and an ability to be able to provide a level of assurance to our customer and the wider community that we have taken our obligations as a company seriously when it comes to cybersecurity. So Cyber Essentials is the starting point for that. It is the governance framework that we use to assure a base level of uniform compliance across that supply chain, and it is the ability for us to be able to start that risk-based conversation with those suppliers. So it's really incredibly important for us. It is the start of a conversation, though, and that is probably the point that I really want to be able to bring out in the conversation today, is that it's the start of a conversation. It's not the end of a conversation, and it isn't the finish of something. For a lot of organisations and a lot of SMEs, it might be all that they need to do to be able to maintain compliance and maintain security and make sure that they have a relevant risk posture. But it isn't the end of that conversation with a lot of organisations, but it is a really good framework for which we can start to engage with them.
I mean, just as a quick follow-up, do you get any pushback? And how
Sure.
do you kind of deal with that?
Of course we do. Yeah, of course we do, yeah. I mean, you ask suppliers to adhere to a different standard or to be able to reach a different level of assurance, then of course we do, especially with those organisations which perhaps aren't as comfortable within a digital landscape, right? So if they're not a digital organisation, they're not providing applications or software or services to us, or they're not a large enterprise organisation, of course we do. There is maybe a perception, correctly or incorrectly, that having to go through the process might take them time. They might have to get in, additional services to be able to help with that. So there is an initial assumption that there's going to be a cost associated with it. Part of the work that we do is to help to engage with them to understand what are the things they can do now in-house, the things that they should be doing to be able to meet that compliance requirement, to be able to ensure that they as a business are secure, how they can leverage it with the rest of their client base as well. So yeah, of course we do, and we should expect to, as a large organisation, we should expect to be able to have those conversations with organisations. But I think there's a lot of work that's been done by IASME and NCSC and the government over the last 10 years to really communicate the benefit of Cyber Essentials through the supply chain as well, and that's helped massively.
I mean, one of the things we're trying to do from an NCSC perspective and working with colleagues in IASME is make it as easy as possible for organisations to achieve this.
Yeah.
We say these are the basic controls, but for a lot of organisations, it can be really hard to do some of these things, and we absolutely recognise that. And I think, Emma, can I come to you just to pick up sort of some of the things we're doing to try and help organisations to achieve the Cyber Essentials, particularly Cyber Essentials Plus?
Yeah, I mean, to start with, we're writing guidance. We've written a lot of guidance. We particularly have non-technical people writing the guidance to try and make it more understandable. So we've got a knowledge hub that just has loads of guidance for all different sizes and sectors of organisation. But we've realised that some organisations need more help. They can't just take guidance. And so we have these amazing people called cyber advisors who are assured not just in terms of how much cybersecurity they know, but whether they can communicate in a non-technical way with small companies. And they're an amazing bunch of people. And you can now, any smaller micro company can apply and get half an hour free advice call with a cyber advisor. And we only started that in last summer. And honestly, the feedback we have had is amazing. The smallest of organizations can get that really high quality advice for free for half an hour. So there's just loads of things that we're trying to get. But anyone who has any ideas about what else we can get, that's what we need. We need people to say, this is a barrier, this is how you could help us, IASME.
And do you want to say a little bit about pathways while we're kind of on the subject?
Yeah, so that's for the smaller organisations. Very large, complex organisations really do often struggle with Cyber Essentials because it is so prescriptive. And, and they have particular issues with digital debt, so, large amounts of unsupported software. They have problems with managing their BYOD and their endpoints. So and they often have very, very complex architectures. So we have been working for the last few years on trying to develop something that is an outcomes assessment. So, okay, you can't put in the technical controls, the 5 technical controls, but are you resilient to commodity attack? So trying to describe what those outcomes are. The reason that Cyber Essentials can be scaled so quickly is because it is so prescriptive. You don't need to be a deep specialist to be able to assess and certify someone. Once you start looking at judgment and outcomes, you start needing a specialist. But in some cases, maybe you do need a specialist. So we have been running a proof of concept where we've taken 10 companies through the pathways, looking at outcomes. And one of the most interesting things of that is, so we have got someone, a company who's got through it in that way, which is great. It proves that it is a viable way forward. But one of the most interesting things is that a lot of the organisations that started off on that path have ended up achieving Cyber Essentials Plus the original way. And the way they've been able to do that is having a specialist, knowledgeable certification body who helps them to put those controls in place. And it turns out that putting the controls in place actually was easier or simpler once they had that specialist advice. So that's a really exciting area, and we're hoping to take that forward.
So again, what we're trying to do here is make it as easy as possible for organisations, and what we can't control is its use in procurement. So I tell a story of we've built a screwdriver with Cyber Essentials, but people use it as a hammer, and it's hard to stop that. In B&Q you can't stop people using tools to do the wrong things with. But what we've tried to do is with things like pathways is where it is where a procurement officer is trying to apply it into the wrong space. There is another way to achieve it, and I think that's really good. So watch this space. Talk a little bit about the economics of it now, and I'll come to Irfan next, which is how does improving supply chain hygiene through Cyber Essentials protect productivity and continuity of UK business? And it'd be great to say something about that 90 million that the minister announced?
You're putting me on the spot. Yes, it was 90 million. I'll come on to that. So all of this is... sorry, before I get into that, Chris, you said Cyber Essentials was a bit like Marmite, but you managed to fill the room with Cyber Essentials in the title, which I think tells us that the story of Cyber Essentials has gone a slightly different direction than it had done in the last 5 years or so. But in the UK, we estimate, at the very low end, I think, that cyber attacks cost the UK economy around £15 billion a year, and that doesn't include IP theft, and that doesn't include national security costs, and that doesn't include knock-on effects to the rest of the economy. So we're really talking about tens of billions of pounds of economic costs. Now, a lot of that will be concentrated around CNI and larger organisations, but we're also at risk in the UK of death by 1,000 cuts, which is the hundreds of thousands or millions of UK businesses that are fall outside of regulation, are very small, will be suffering cyber attacks and having disruption and being victims of ransomware attacks. And so something like Cyber Essentials is incredibly important to establish as a baseline to say this is the minimum level of security we expect across the economy. It becomes really interesting when you see that 88% of UK businesses have never heard of Cyber Essentials. So 88% of UK businesses, I'll say it again, have never heard of Cyber Essentials, which I think for people in this conference is unfathomable, but that's the reality that we're living in. So when large companies are dealing with suppliers and saying you need to get Cyber Essentials, a lot of them will kind of see it as I haven't even got a clue how to start. So things like making it as easy as possible and breaking down that barrier is incredibly important. But we also need to be looking at how we set expectations and norms as a government and say this is what it takes to be a good corporate cyber citizen. And the FTSE letter, the letter to the FTSE 350 and other companies last year was part of that, as was kind of what the minister laid out in the pledge on Tuesday, that if you sign up to the early warning system, if you do the corporate governance code of practice, and you have Cyber Essentials in your company and across your supply chain, then you are, that's what it takes to be a good corporate cyber citizen, and not doing that is no longer acceptable. And that sort of covers both the larger companies and how they manage their supply chain with this kind of, this tool that's as easy as possible to use, but also smaller companies who don't want to invest, or who have been unable to invest in it before. So it's a big change to say this is what the expectations are, and hopefully that will kind of bring down the economic costs of cyber attacks to the country. The minister talked about a funding package of around £90 million over the next few years. That is a large part of that is going to be to support companies who it's truly challenging to find the money within the organisation to actually invest in this. This will help those sorts of organisations. This will help kind of improve the supply side of Cyber Essentials as well, and kind of get more smaller businesses delivering this. And so it's really going to hopefully it's going to unblock some of that, some of those challenges that we've seen.
Cool. Neil, do you want to come in on that? Otherwise, I'll.
Yeah, I think just on the very small businesses, we found that the lack of awareness, and if you sell on the benefits rather than force them to do something, so the fact that they get insurance, they can talk to a cyber advisor, and that then opens up a further conversation, because most small business owners are aware of the risk. They read the same media reports as us. And in our supply chain, we see so many smaller businesses being attacked by business email compromise and phishing. And they just don't know where to go when that happens, because they are the smallest of businesses in the UK. So with those smaller businesses getting that free insurance and someone to call to help you in a crisis, and then they say, so I get all of that for just Cyber Essentials? And you go, yes. And it makes a far easier conversation, especially when they get an independent advisor that talks to them, which then maybe helps them further.
Just on that, I think there's two things there that are really, really important. One is, yeah, absolutely, the phone number for companies to call is invaluable. I think with things like, and apologies for saying this on stage, you know, the AI reports that we're reading in the newspaper, it is a game changer, right? You're now, you know, opportunistic cyber criminals will be less targeted because they don't have to be as targeted. They will be kind of spreading out across the economy looking for vulnerable organizations rather than vulnerabilities in an organization. So we have to think about recovery just as much as we're thinking about prevention. And that recovery is, where's the phone number? Who do I actually call who's going to come in and not require me to take out a bank loan to actually pay the fees to recover? So that insurance bit is really important. The other thing we found is that, you know, as you said, the main reason why companies will get Cyber Essentials is because their customers demand it. We have found previously where we have said we will subsidize people taking up Cyber Essentials, we end up with money at the end because not enough people are taking it up. That's because they said it's not a money problem, it's a senior executive attention and time investment issue. Whereas if large corporate supply chains are requiring it, it becomes a condition of business, there's a commercial imperative, and actually the money becomes less important than the commercial imperative. So both of those things I think are critical for small organisations taking up Cyber Essentials.
Cool. And Neil, I'll come to you with this, and then we're getting some really good questions in, so we'll take some questions. In terms of transparency, how does Cyber Essentials provide that compared to maybe other schemes you're aware of or other approaches you've taken in the past?
So thank you. So we did a really interesting workshop a year ago for NCSA and IASME for the biggest construction companies in the UK. And we looked at the questions that we were asking of our supply chain. And it was a nightmare because we were all asking different language, different terminology for the same outcome. So if you were a business in one of our supply chains, you had all your customers asking you sort of different questions. And if you're not a cyber guy, you didn't know what to do. And the danger is, times are hard, you want the business, I'll just say yes and move on. And what we've then done is, again, working through IASME, is said, let's come together and set a common assessment standard with Build UK and just ask some really clear questions using the same language. And the first one is, do you have Cyber Essentials? And then there's a hint that says, if you don't, it's not the end of the world, it'd be better if you did. But here's why we think it's important, and a link out to say how to get it. And then the next one is, do you have Cyber Essentials Plus? And what if one of your customers asks you to do something, you might go, well, that's a little bit difficult. I'm going to go and do it somewhere else. I just won't do work for them. But if all of your customers are asking you to do the same thing in the same language, then small businesses and you know, medium-sized businesses wake up and go, this matters. And then they're seeing the media coverage, you know, the different adverts, and they're saying, and what we're starting to see, this is more of a groundswell coming back from these businesses saying, right, okay, we now want to start doing that. We are nervous about mandating in terms of that transparency because we can't force it in. But again, what you're going to see, that initial groundswell of businesses that adopt it, they're going to win more business and they're going to be operating at lower risk. And there will become that sort of fear of being, you know, fear of missing out. And although we've spoken before that Cyber Essentials is not a risk-based solution, you do or do not, which is part of the simple beauty of it. But the way in which you deploy it across your supply chain, as Steph said, can and should be risk-based. So don't wait for perfect. Just get on and find your exemplars, get people up and running. And then if there are other people in your sector doing the same, you're probably not the only company doing that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the whole defend as one solution we're trying to work towards.
I mean, you mentioned it's not risk-based, but there's an interesting story behind that, I suppose, which was the way Cyber Essentials came about was we analysed a whole load of attacks against large organisations, and they got in through not having one of these controls in place. And so we determined that those 5 controls, it was CSG at the time, but now from an NCSE perspective, were really the minimum set organisations should have to kind of reduce their risk. So we're a risk owner in that respect, in so much as we as NCSE are saying, if you've done these 5 things, we stand behind you and say, you've done good due diligence against the level of threat they're expecting. If you're up against a more sophisticated threat actor, yes, you have to do more. But from our perspective, we're kind of the risk owner. So when people come along to me, which they now and again do, and say, oh, this patching 14 days, can't do it. Can we just get rid of that? Can we make it 30 days? Wouldn't that be... And it's like, well, from our perspective as the risk owner, we would be uncomfortable, especially with, what we're seeing with AI now and the speed of which from, vulnerabilities being published to them start to publicly being compromised. 14 days is quite relaxed. So, if we pushed it out to 30 days, we're basically saying, yeah, 30 days is all right, we think that's okay. I'd actually like to bring it down to 2 days. Now, we won't, it's all right. But, that's the sort of, if we're going to follow what the evidence tells us, that's the direction we would go in. But we are kind of the risk owners for that. So it is risk-based, and the pathways does allow then that outcomes-based approach, which does take into that risk. So we are evolving it as we go to make it more applicable. So I'll take a couple of pull a couple of questions from the floor and see who wants to take this up. So the first one is, how do we deal with overseas suppliers who might be reluctant to spend time complying with a UK-defined scheme instead of their domestic or international equivalents? And there's another question around how do we assess equivalence, and we'll take that slightly separate. So what do we do with overseas suppliers? Who wants to have a bash at that?
I might be able to help on that one.
Go on, Stephanie. Give us a...
So I think it depends on who oversees. So generally there are a lot of schemes around which are very similar to Cyber Essentials. So there is a definite equivalence, and in finding those equivalences where they are pertinent to those geographies is absolutely the right thing to do. The other thing to do is that you can consume it as part of your governance and risk and compliance framework as well. So you as an organisation can take those principles, you can tailor them if necessary, and to cascade them down your supply chain as part of the standards that you as a organisation require before an organisation or a different geography or a different business within that geography to be able to do business with you as well. So I think it's quite a transferable set of governance controls that we can put in place, and that's the approach we tend to take. I mean, we're incredibly lucky. Most of the work that we do is within Five Eyes organisations, or 5 Eyes countries. So there's an equivalency there that we can absolutely kind of line things up around.
Neil, have you had any experience of that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think there's just 2 sides of the coin. So that the regulated sector is far more prescriptive, and we shouldn't be having those conversations about why using someone that doesn't have Cyber Essentials when they're overseas. It's in that unregulated sector, and I think as Steph said, it's a more nuanced approach to say, well, what have you got, and where do we feel across the supply chain that we have of over 12,000 suppliers? Is that a discussion we need to have today? So if you've got something that is broadly equivalent and we're happy with that, can we assess it? If we can move them towards Cyber Essentials, there's no reason for them not to have it, but it may well be that if you pick a fight with a vendor who's already got a certain level of accreditation and you ignore other people, then we're still at the stage, I think, in the industry of go for the easy wins. And then you get into equivalency as well. And
this sort of like drives, I think, to the heart of the question about Cyber Essentials. And it's important. We're on the resiliency track here, and we're talking about Cyber Essentials within resiliency. We're not on the certification track. So the point of Cyber Essentials and the aim of it is to increase security and resilience within the supply chain. So I think if we start on that principle and you start on the outcome, what is the outcome we want to achieve, which is greater security, greater resilience, and greater comfort on our supply chain, and we use that as the framework within which we build our kind of governance, risk and compliance framework, then you're always going to be on the right path, rather than starting with what I want is the certificate.
Yeah.
I want the certification. I don't cover some of my bosses is I don't care about the badge. I do care about the security and resilience and the outcome of it. And if you start on that with that focus, I think then you will always come out away with a more positive result.
I mean, equivalence is a question I often get. You know, what does NCSC think is equivalent? And the trouble is, it's really hard to find anything that's equivalent. So the closest I've come across is a Belgian scheme, which you can sort of map between it. Because you have to look at two things. And there's an excellent blog on the NCSC website. I won't say who wrote it, but it talks about exactly the challenges with equivalence. Because what you're looking at is something that looks at the controls, and there's something that assesses the controls. So you've got to look at those two parts. And ultimately, it has to be in the eye of the risk owner as to whether they think it's equivalent or not. So from an NCSC perspective, we think these 5 controls with the assessment is a basic standard, but we can't see anything. And had there been anything, we wouldn't have invented Cyber Essentials in the first place. You know, why do work when you can just pick something off the shelf? And in the blog, I talk about particularly 27,000. And yes, you can see how 27,000 can be, but you've got to do more work. You've got to understand what controls were put in, how it was assessed. That's the work you've got to do as the risk owner to make sure you're happy with that. We can't really do that because it's not as nice, it's not as clean as how Cyber Essentials works. I'll come on to another question. I think, Irfan, I think this one might be for you. So if 88% of companies don't know CE exists, what is the plan to make them aware and get them accredited? Is there a target you are working to in terms of companies achieving it, and by what date?
Well, I think we're on the wrong side of 50, right? I think we need to have the majority of companies know what this is rather than not know what this is. The pot of funding that was mentioned, the £90 million to boost cyber resilience, you know, some of that will be around supporting companies, supporting suppliers. Some of it will be around raising awareness. So, you know, the NCSC has been around for 10 years, Cyber Essentials has been around for 12 years, and we're at 88%, which means that for 10 to 12 years we've been talking to 12% of the business population. And so I think there's some of that money will be for raising awareness for comms and media and you know, specialist, non-specialist ways to get through to businesses. You know, we mentioned the FTSE 350 letter. It was signed by 4 ministers, the CEO of the NCSC, the CEO of the NCA. When I saw that letter, I recognised, you know, I was like, oh, Richard Horne signed it, and my Secretary of State signed it. And when most businesses saw that letter, they saw that Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, had signed it. And so I think there's something in there about who we use to deliver the message, right? If cybersecurity specialists are talking about this, cybersecurity interested people are going to be listening, and a lot of the rest of the world won't be. And I think we need to find the right messengers to be delivering messages that aren't around cybersecurity. They're around risk management, they're around business continuity, and we've got to do it in places that, you know, at conferences that don't have cyber in the title, right? Because we've already you know, the people in this room, I think you're all great, but you're all on my side already. I need to be talking to people who disagree with me, who need to be, you know, we need to be in rooms where they're talking about the cost of operating, they're talking about the convenience of IT, and be throwing these challenges into them. So that's the vague plan for the moment. Having the funding recently approved, we can now go off and have a look at what is going to work, who we're going to be targeting, how we're going to be targeting. But awareness raising is going to be a big part of that to get us to the other side of 50% at least.
Yeah, and I think that for me, there's 2 success factors in Cyber Essentials. One is the numbers, but the other is the efficacy, as in its effectiveness in mitigating the risk. And I think somebody will correct me, I'm sure, but I'll have a bash at it. But I don't know of any other cyber approach, scheme, thing, technical term, that has that impact data around it. You know, we've got the data from St James's Place, you know, when they required their partners to have Cyber Essentials Plus, 3,000 odd organisations, they saw their incident drop by 80%. Then we've got the insurance data, which we continue to monitor, which I think last year was 90% less likely to make a claim. I do not see that kind of effectiveness data from anywhere else. So when people say, "Oh, why don't we, use this one instead?" It's like it's really hard because we've got this justification, and I think that's the other benefit from it. We are pushing from a really feels like a solid base of evidence, which is really hard to get in cybersecurity. A solid base of evidence. I'll come up with another one from the floor, which is we're not regularly asked about Cyber Essentials from our customer base, but are commonly asked to provide ISO 27001 certification. Would you say Cyber Essentials is just as important for a UK business to acquire? Well, of course I would. However, I will ask the panel. But there is a statistic. I did Google, other search engines are available, and I think there's something like 30,000 ISO certificates in the UK. There are over 50,000 Cyber Essentials certificates in the UK. So just an interesting statistic. Anybody want to pick up on that one?
I think
Neil.
So 27001 as an ISMS is effectively a risk-based approach. And what we've found is if you look at the scoping statement, the terms of applicability, and you may be even asked to see people's risk register, it can get quite complex quite quickly. And what we found, when you're operating at scale, the simplicity, the binary approach of Cyber Essentials, which for many organizations is actually harder, because it's like, do it or don't do it, there is no try. And sorry for the Yoda reference, but whereas 27001, companies can apply their risk appetite, and their risk appetite may not be in line with what you're expecting from that company or brand. So that's why we've always said that, in line with a well-known blog, it's almost easier to assess at scale on Cyber Essentials. But 27001 does have its place, as do other schemes, but it's just harder for us to assess across the landscape. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the more complex an organisation is, the more broader and sophisticated the governance framework is that you're going to have to use to be able to manage cybersecurity across an organisation. So ISO 27001 absolutely has its place within that structure, and it is, I think, the transition for a business who is maybe starting in Cyber Essentials and is moving into an enterprise organisation and is looking to kind of maybe build a cyber security or information security function within a business. It is a really good mechanism for planning on how you would do that. I don't think they are sort of mutually exclusive, though. They definitely overlay on top of each other and are complementary to each other and are designed to be as well. So yeah, I think there's places for both of them, and there's different drivers from organisations like us for why we might ask for ISO 27001 or why we might ask for Cyber Essentials, but they're absolutely complementary. I would expect somebody who has a ISO 27001 certification to have a Cyber Essentials certification. I wouldn't necessarily expect somebody who has a Cyber Essentials certification to be ISO 27001.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Emma, and then I'll come to Irfan.
I was just going to say, in terms of suppliers asking for it, I think the pledge that was mentioned yesterday, where organisations can publicly say, we're going to look at putting Cyber Essentials in our supply chain, I think maybe that will have an effect on how many customers start asking for Cyber Essentials.
It's the same point, I think. It's interesting that if you're getting asked for ISO 27001, that means your procurement people understand or have been told or have seen that 27001 is the thing that you should be asking for. Actually, we need to be getting to that group of people and say, by the way, there's also this thing called Cyber Essentials that you might want to, 27001's been around a longer time. People are more comfortable with it as a standard. That's great. But that tells me that if they're asking for that, then we probably need to get Cyber Essential thrown into the same mix with the same people, because they may not have heard of it. Things like the pledge, ministers talking about it will make a difference. But I think that tells us more about who we need to reach as well, rather than whether it's the right standard or not.
I can tell you for sure that all the GR specialists in the room, or GRC specialists in the room, wouldn't find it necessarily easier to manage than a Cyber Essentials certification. Anyone who's had to manage an ISO certification will absolutely attest to that, I'm sure.
Yeah. And the thing is, Cyber Essentials manages one risk. It's if you look at the threat model that we built around Cyber Essentials, it's attack from the internet, using commodity tools and techniques. So if you've got the Cyber Essentials controls, that is the risk you are mitigating. If you have a 27,000 certificate, that doesn't say what risks you're mitigating. You have to dig into how the information security management system is working, what risks are identified. You have to follow through to the controls. If it's got a certificate, what did the accreditor or the certifier look at when they did it? So that's all got to be done. So they do different things, but I think you're quite right. I mean, if somebody came along, I'll talk about this maybe later, but if you've got a Cyber Essentials certificate, that can be part of a 27,000 assessment because it's additional evidence that you can bring forward. Yes, and when we kicked off Cyber Essentials, we did actually look at could we build it into ISO 27000 and profile it and that kind of thing. Got far too complicated. But certainly, if you can reuse evidence, and when we start talking about the cyber assessment framework, the CAF, which we're using within regulated bodies and regulated sectors, we're looking at how does a Cyber Essentials certificate provide evidence of good practice on systems, at least basic good practice on the systems within an organisation. You shouldn't have to redo that work because actually the assessment is quite rigorous, and that can be reused. So how can we help make that just easier? That's kind of where we're trying to get. Neil, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think it's the start of the journey. But if we're taking that whole of society impact to reduce the number that Irfan talked about, it's the baseline. Other organisations will have other accreditations. 27,001, there's the new DCC, there's the various American accreditations. And you need to look at, as Steph said, the risk that brings to your organisation, and are they operating with the right level of maturity? But as you look across your supply chain, there's going to be a lot of people out there who've just never heard of it. And that, I think that's the audience that we're now trying to hit in the construction sector, to say we cannot afford for our suppliers to go out of business or to have this sort of consequential loss from cybercrime, because it means that we can't do our job. And that is the target that we're trying to hit this year.
So another question here, which is, my experience is Cyber Essentials doesn't have the same respect that is given to other standards like ISO. Well, it says NCSC and IASME, but I'll say, what is IASME doing to solve this perception? And I may come to Irfan as well, and then I might say something.
So Cyber Essentials is often like, oh gosh, that's so low end. It's it's a tick box exercise, etc., etc. Anyone who's been through it, hopefully you found out that it isn't just a tick box exercise. It's updated every year, and sometimes it can be quite hard. So how do we get that across to people? It's something that we've been trying, obviously, for the last 11 years. I think as more people go through it, more people understand that it isn't just a tick box exercise. I think sometimes there is a tendency, if it's very hard for an organisation, for them to say, well, we're not going to do it because it's too low. It's all these things that we have to explain more. And I think as people understand more how much effort goes into us and NCSE keeping it up to date, the fact that every time there is a breach that is in the newspaper, if they have a Cyber Essentials certificate, we do an investigation, and we learn from that. So this feedback loop comes into the fact that it keeps being updated. So in a way, it's more relevant than some of the larger standards that have a much longer feedback loop. But we need to explain that to people. It's not obvious when you first come to Cyber Essentials. Hopefully, as time goes by, people will engage with it and they will understand that it is actually quite a significant bar.
I mean, I think we hear at the same time that it's both really easy or too low and also too hard. And I think as long as we're getting both of those criticisms, I know that we're going in the right direction, because it is supposed to be a balancing act, right? It is supposed to be something that is really doable and really achievable and inexpensive, but that covers your bases. And so I think, I think as long as we're getting criticism on both sides, we're right in the middle. I think if it starts to swing one way or the other, we'll need to be quite careful. But as you've both said, it's a risk management tool. You don't need, no one is saying you need to use this for every single supplier. There is a there is a grouping of your suppliers where this is absolutely appropriate for, and it's a bulk, it's for bulk. It's not necessarily your top end, and it might not be your bottom end, but that big chunk in the middle, that's what this is for. Yeah. Although appropriate for everyone, and so use it as you see fit in your risk management approach. I think. I mean,
there's an interesting. I mean, it says the same respect that is given to other standards, and I come back to the evidence base. Show me the evidence base that these other standards have of their effectiveness, and yeah, because that's what it comes back to. We've got that solid evidence of these controls actually make that difference. I'll come to another question. Are there any security controls you were looking to include? Maybe this, Emma, I'll pass this to you and then maybe I'll pick it back up. Are there any security controls that you're looking to include in the future that will broaden the baseline, giving emerging threats and technologies?
So, honestly, particularly in cybersecurity environments like this, everybody has at least one more control they want to add. Everybody. And if we added them all, it would be bigger than ISO 27000. The joy of Cyber Essentials is that it is simple. And it's actually becoming slightly less simple over time because we're trying to close loopholes. So it is becoming slightly less simple. For a lot of organizations, they don't do cybersecurity, they don't do any of this. We have to make it an achievable first step. So it has to be the things that really make a difference. And so what are the essential things? And they've stayed the same for the last 12 years. But I ask Chris, and Chris asks instant response people,
yes.
What's new? Nothing is new. And, I'm amazed. So things are quicker. But as far as I understand, nothing's new. And it's the same things not being in place that allows all the commodity attacks. So maybe when people have got those 5 controls in place, we can look at putting some others in. But, most organisations haven't even heard of it yet. So we've got so much to do.
Neil, do you want to come in there?
So the one thing that Cyber Essentials doesn't do, which it shouldn't do, is tell your suppliers what to do if they have a data breach. And that's where contract law and that partnership with procurement comes in. And again, feedback from the construction industry is that actually saying to your supply chain, if you have a data breach, and we're not talking GDPR, but if you have any sort of data breach or security incident, we would really like to know, and we'd like to know in a timely fashion, and actually this is the central email address that you tell us on. Don't send it to the person that sent you the purchase order or someone in procurement who's on holiday. Have a centralized email address. And that's not something that Cyber Essentials should have as a control. But that is what you need to be doing as part of that maturity. With the construction industry is now working. And I think the other thing that we're trying to do with IASME is say, what we've found is that different customers, well, is it 4 hours or 6 hours or 2 days or 2 weeks or 2 months? So that there's a concerted conversation in the centre to say, what do we align on? So that if you are in an incident, you've only got a few things to do, but you know that it's the same timeline for all of your customers. You haven't got 20 different contracts with 20 different timelines, because we don't want to put any more stress onto someone who's probably having a pretty bad day.
I mean, we could add that in. I mean, not in terms of a control, but so one of the things that everybody tells me we should add is backups or recovery in there. And it is part of the standard. And we encourage the CBs to encourage their clients to put in backups. So why don't we mandate it? Because if you look at the data, we know that it's effective at keeping attackers out, because that's what the stats tell us. The 80% from St James's Place. So that's not to say 80% isn't 100% and 92% isn't 100%. So clearly there's a chance that people will get through and you will get ransomware and you will get encrypted. But we've made that a risk decision on that organisation to decide whether they want to put that extra belt and braces in and they want to have that additional measure in, but you won't fail if you don't have it. If we put it in, every organisation that has a Cyber Essentials certificate will have to do backups. And they're not that easy often to do properly. And that costs. So you may have to buy in additional software or products or whatever. And the philosophy behind Cyber Essentials to begin with was less is more. let's define the absolute minimum that organizations should do that is as free as I can say as cheap as possible, but mainly because it uses commercial, off-the-shelf IT. It's just a way of configuring it. Minimizing the amount of specialist stuff you would have to buy on top of it. That was the approach we took. Makes it easier to assess, makes it easy for organizations to implement. And so anything we add, we always do this return on investment kind of approach. By doing this, how much does it help? We have talked, haven't we, Irfan, about whether we do a public, do some sort of consultation around it. And at the end of the day, if the audience says there shall be backups, then we would put them in. But it will come at a cost. And lots of organisations may not like that. And I think that's the challenge we wrestle with all the time.
I don't think, so it's the cost will definitely be, is really important, because this has to be kind of something that everyone can do and everyone can afford to do. And I think asking the question on how important are backups in this 5, does 5 become 6 and this is a result, is a question we might need to ask. I think what will decide whether we ask it formally and do something about it will be, I think everyone's made a prediction that you will be subject to a cyber attack. It will just depend on how severe that is. I think seeing how that hypothesis plays out over the next year or so will probably dictate how important it is to have backups as one of the controls. If it is suddenly that it is going to be a lot easier to get into people's systems and cause disruption, then it becomes a critical part of everyone's basic cyber hygiene. Then we'll look again with all the implications on cost and recovery. But it also is, I'll go back to the kind of the 3 recommendations on the pledge and the letter that we've sent out. Within the Cyber Governance Code of Practice, you are required, or you are asked, to look at how your company recovers and what your recovery plans and backups will probably be a part of that as well. So I don't think it's something that we're ignoring either.
Neil, did you want to come in on that one?
I think the backups one's the difficult one, because most people here probably aware, it's really easy to back up. It's when you come to restore that gets a little bit more challenging. And I think, resilience track, we're looking more at what is your business resilience, what's your minimum viable business, you get into complexities about continuity and disaster recovery, and I think that would probably break the ethos of what Cyber Essentials are trying to do. So that's something that we would take as a separate set of questions in that third-party risk management. We'd use Cyber Essentials as the basics to say, look, do these 5 things and do them well. We can then, Steph was saying, we can start layering on other questions that are appropriate to the context of that organisation.
So I personally, I don't have a strong opinion on whether we need to include backups or not. I think it adds extra complexity. I think we need to mature the ecosystem before we can start to have that conversation. I think one of the things that IASME and NCSC has done really well, and we, I think, as organisations need to continue to do, is to help especially smaller businesses who don't have large teams make better decisions about the types of technologies that they use in their organisation, because that is, I think, really fundamental in making sure they're able to have resilience, they're able to recover well, that they're able to have really good security controls in place, and they're able to right-size the technology for the environment that they've got and the ecosystem that they work in. So I think that's the area I think that we as a cyber industry writ large need to probably start to lean into, especially in what is a rapidly evolving technological landscape. And I'm not going to say those words, but with a rapidly evolving technological landscape, people are asking more questions about what they can and can't use and how they can use it safely. And I think we have a responsibility around that to help them.
So, conscious of time, I don't think we've got any time for any last questions, but I think what I'd like to do is ask the panel to give sort of their tip for the audience to go away with. Emma, what would your tip for the audience to go away with today?
Sign up to the supply check tool. You can go onto the IASME website. It's completely for free. You sign up and you get access to it. You can upload 5,000 at a time names or company numbers of your suppliers, and it'll just tell you who in your supply chain has got Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus. Just having that information allows you to at least start to make risk-based decisions on, is that okay? Are there some that you need to help? If you do need to help them, please come and ask us. IASME is just here to help you do that.
Irfan.
Talk to someone who you think has no idea about Cyber Essentials. Go and find someone who you just know is hiding under a rock and trying to avoid this issue. help a small business out by telling them that they can recover. If you have companies in your supply chain, tell them about it and require them to have Cyber Essentials. But get the message out that this is something that is the norm across the UK, or is becoming the norm across the UK now.
Neil?
If you try and do this as a CISO, you are going to fail. So what you need to do is reach out, as Steph said, your procurement, your supply chain managers, people who have a relationship, and engage in a friendly, non-threatening way. A letter from the CISO to your supply chain is not going to get the impact that you expect it to have. Whereas going out through the supply chain and saying, hey, we want to help you, is probably a better return on investment.
100% agree with that, but risk assess your supply chain, work out where your critical suppliers are, start conversations with them. You've got to start the conversation.
And I suppose for me it will be, get the word out. But also I like to do a plug. We've got the Cyber Action Toolkit on the NCSC website. So that's, like I say, we try and do everything we can to help organisations do it themselves as much as anything before they have to sort of go for help with the cyber advisors. And the Cyber Action Toolkit provides a kind of a step-by-step approach for implementing some of the controls and some additional ones as well. So again, opportunities to promote that. Please encourage people to think about doing it. So we're just out of time. Perfectly almost. I'd like to thank my panel. A round of applause for the panel, please.